Okay, so in this segment, we're going to learn how to rig our 3D models and have them move based off a joint hierarchy. So you might be wondering what all that means. As a recap, we learnt how to animate things by moving them in 3D space. So for example, on this x-axis, we're going to go, and so it's just animating in 3D space like that. We also learnt how to, let's give it some segments. We also learnt how to use the deformers, like the bend deformer, to move objects like that and deform them. So it's like a little elbow. But what if we wanted to have a joint chain that we could control, similar to how bones on a human body works? Okay, so let's get started. We are going to give this more segments. So let's make sure that they're fairly even. Let's give it more on that direction. So you do want pretty even topology for this, so I'm going to decrease that amount. You just basically want them to be as close to squares as possible in this case. Okay, that looks good. So now what we're going to do is go to the character menu and then the joint tool. Right now we can't see the inside of our mesh, so we're going to go to the display menu and then hit lines. Okay, now that we can see inside, I'm going to go to the character and then joint tool. Make sure that projection is turned on. It's going to do its best to stay inside of the volume of our cube. I'm going to go to where it starts and hit Control and click. It's going to create a root and a joint. Make sure the joint is still selected. We're going to go midway through the cube and then do the same thing, Control click. Then to the very end, Control click. You see that it's, for the most part, made it inside of the volume of this cube, which is good. But we want to make sure that it's actually a straight line. So how can we do this? We come to our first joint here. Make sure that it's aligned. So it's going to be Z facing. Then our middle one, we want to make sure that we center out the rotation as well and center that out. If by any chance your joints ended up outside of the bounds, for example, something like this, and yeah, it was like way different, we can actually still reset this. So it's important to note that in Cinema, whatever object the one selected is under, it's going to inherit that transform. So you'll see if I drag it out, these transform values will change because now it's relative to the world axes. So just as a test, I'm just going to hit 0, 0, 0. It's going to recenter to the world axes. Whereas before, when it was a child of the joint above it, if I hit 0, 0, it's going to snap back to the place of the first joint. Does that make sense? So whatever your child is under, it's going to inherit the transform of it. So if you were to zero everything out, it would snap back to exactly what the parent is. Okay, so with that being said, with this one here, we're just also going to zero out the position there, and then I'm going to drag it out. So the only difference we want between these three joints is the Z, and that is correct because it's just staying the same on the X and the Y, but it's just moving forward in space. Cool. So let's drag this into the middle, and you'll notice that if I drag it, it's actually going to affect the one after it as well down the chain. If we just want to move this middle joint, we can hit the 7 key on our keyboard before moving it, and that will actually allow us to move it independent of the parent and the child. Let's rename this to be shoulder, and then this one let's call elbow, and we'll call this one hand, and we'll call our cube arm. We also have to make the arm editable. If not, rigging will not work. So I'm going to press the C key to make it editable. So we have a joint chain, right? So we can move that. But then how do we actually get this cube to follow the movement of our joints? What we're going to need is a rigging and a weight system. So we are going to right click, go to rigging tags. We're going to go weight tag. This allows us to define areas of influence on our mesh for each joint. For example, the shoulder, we would want it to control this region of the arm, the elbow, this middle region, and then the hand, the end. Okay, and what we're going to do is now in our weight manager, we're going to drag in the joints that we want. So the shoulder, elbow, and the hand. I'm going to shift double click on this weight manager. I'm going to get these hamburger icons and just dock it right here so we can see. Going to go to our joints. And you'll see that it's actually assigned a color for each joint. So red coincides with the shoulder and green coincides with the elbow. So you might be wondering, do we need the hand? For this example, it's just 2 bones. And so we only need to rig the shoulder and the elbow and then blend between the two for the elbow point. So we're going to select shoulder, and then I'm going to go to the character and weight tool. Going to go to our quick shading. And then I'm going to make sure that visible only is unselected, because if I check it and then start painting, you'll notice that set to smooth, make sure it's set to add. You'll notice that if I paint on the other side, it's not actually visible. So let's make sure that visible only is unticked. That way, whatever I paint will be on both sides. Then I'm going to go middle mouse into our front view. Then I'm going to start painting all the way until about halfway. Okay. Then I'm going to select the elbow, which is again green. I'm going to start painting all the way until halfway. Okay. Then I'm going to select both of these. So you notice that we have one side red for the shoulder joint, and then the elbow, which is everything after that. Okay. And then in our weight tool, by the way, if you lose your weight tool, so say you selected it and you're like, oh, where's my weight tool? A shortcut is to just press the spacebar key on your keyboard. That will actually bring you back to whatever tool you were using last. So that's a really handy tip. And then what you want to do is, instead of the mode add, you want to change that to smooth. So I'm going to use the middle mouse button and drag it out to make our brush bigger. And I'm just going to smooth out the in-between. And you'll see that that only gets us a certain way. So what we want to do is, in our weight manager, come to where it says commands, make sure the mode is set to smooth, and then hit apply all. And just keep mashing that, and you'll see that it actually smooths out the middle really nicely. Before we apply the next step, it's important to note that whatever's green will be parented to the elbow joint, because that was the color that it gave us, and whatever was red will be on this red joint, the shoulder. So you can see how it's going to move. If we move it, nothing happens. Before we see anything, we actually need to come to the character. I'm going to press shift and get a skin deformer. So now if we start moving the elbow, you'll see that it will actually deform. So you can imagine this could be a guy bicep curling, or it could be like a worm, could be anything. But we have now learned how to use a joint chain to drive the deformation of a mesh. What's also cool is we could control, right now if we want to animate, we have to select the shoulder, we have to then rotate, we have to then rotate the elbow again. So what if we just wanted to control the whole thing from one point? So if we move this, the whole arm would move. It's really easy. It's called an IK chain. So I'm going to select the shoulder, then I'm going to control and click the hand. Then in character, I'm going to go create IK chain. Automatically, that will apply a tag to the first joint that we selected. It will say the end and the goal. And now this goal here, we can now move it and the arm will follow. But right now it's bending the wrong way. You'll notice that we want it to bend down and up. All we need to do is change the twist. So as it goes, we actually want to twist this 90 degrees. So there we go. Now we have the control of the arm and it's twisting the right way. So what we can do, we can just animate this point here, this hand goal. We've rigged this arm so that it deforms, and we could animate this. So let's give it a go. What I'm going to do is change the shape to be a cube. Then I'm going to scale this up so we can just grab this null now, and it's just going to move that for us, which is pretty cool. So let's add a vibrate tag. So let's go animation tags, vibrate, and then in this, I'm going to enable position. I'm just going to reset this value to be, this will be our home state. So that, I'm just going to drop a keyframe. Let's set a keyframe there, and then at frame 40, let's actually bring it up so it's in a flexed position. So it's going to flex, boom, and then let's slow down the frequency and give it a lot of movement. So that's pretty cool. He flexes, and then he kind of shows off his muscle. He's like, boom, look at that. So again, he just flexes, and then we've added random movement to the vibrate tag. Let's take it up a notch and just have a bit of fun, and this is optional. But let's say when he flexed, we wanted a bicep muscle to actually poof up. How do we do that? We're going to use what's called the pose morph tag. So I'm going to right click and go to rigging tags and select the pose morph. Pose morph. Okay. And then what we want is the points. So I'm going to select points. What it's going to do, it's going to give us a base pose, and then it's going to give us the first pose, which is what we're blending to. So let's call this flexed, and then the base pose, we're going to call this rest. In the flexed one, we're going to select that. We're going to hit post deformers, so it's going to happen at the very end. I'm then going to go to our point mode. I'm going to right click and select the brush tool. Going to make the brush size bigger. Then I'm going to modify it so it now, we get like a massive bicep. He's been hitting the gym, he's curling 30 kilos. Look at that. Cool. And then now that's our flexed pose. So then if we toggle between our rest pose and our flex pose, we can see that that's now different. And then we can hit the animate, and this slider is now going to allow us to actually morph between the two blend shapes. So it's as simple as keyframing it at 0% here. And then when he flexes it, let's hit 100. And if we press play, boom. Now his bicep reacts to when his arm flexes. Now, let's say at this point, we wanted his bicep to kind of bulge a little bit up and down. So how do we do that? Let's go to the animation tags, right click and track modifier. And then we're going to go noise. And pull the strength up a little bit, 0.2 or 0.4. And let's slow the speed down, something like this. And look at that. It's now bouncing up and down. I hope this was a fun little segment, but yeah, you learnt how to rig this arm model. So we learnt how to rig it. We learnt how to draw a joint system. And then we learnt how to use the weight tag and the rigging, the weight tools to deform this arm with the joints. And then we were able to create an IK chain on the joints. And then we were able to move that endpoint around using procedural animation, the vibrate tag as well. Then we use the pose morph tag to emphasize the bicep when he flexed.